everyone. I'm excited to join you today and thrilled to introduce your next speaker to you. I first met Cindy Taff and Jamie Beard about the same time, maybe the middle of last year. And as our relationship has grown, and especially after reading the Wired article that mentions both of them, and I highly recommend that you read that if you've not, my respect and admiration has grown for both of them. So Cindy Taff has 35 years of experience in the oil and gas industry. Prior to leading Sage, she was Shell Energy's VP of Global Unconventional Well Operations, leading a team of more than 350 staff and 1,200 contractors responsible for a $1 billion annual budget. She is now the CEO of Sage Geosystems, a growing company based in Houston and providing both geothermal and energy storage solutions deep in the earth. So with that said, it is my privilege to introduce to you Cindy Taff, Chief Executive Officer of Sage Geosystems.
Well, thank you, Clay. The admiration is mutual, by the way. Let me get started. So we all know that the growth of wind and solar has outpaced any kind of renewable baseload for the last 15 years, which means that energy storage is really critical to the clean energy landscape. So an important fact to know is that pumped hydro storage, which is not talked about very often, it doesn't get a lot of attention, it actually represents 95% of the energy storage around the world. And what we're doing is pumped hydro, but rather than going up a mountain, we're going deep in the earth. All right, so this is what we've done over the last 2.5 years since our initial funding. We focused on getting into the field quickly, and we did so in late 2021 in order to demonstrate two of our critical technologies, one being our gravity or downward-oriented fracturing, and then the other being our cyclic EGS technology. But during the testing, we actually realized that we had a perfect energy storage solution. So earlier this year, we went back to the same Starr County well in Texas, and we did a mechanical energy storage full-scale commercial pilot where we demonstrated two things: long duration and load following energy storage. Again, very similar to pump hydro, but again, deep in the earth. Our extensive data that we gathered from these field tests has proven that our energy storage is actually commercially viable. And just to mention, we used Pelton turbines on location. I'll show you it later in this presentation to generate electricity and to power some equipment on location. But our modeling shows that the levelized cost of storage, LCOS, is actually cost competitive right now with pumped hydro and with lithium-ion batteries. So we're moving quickly to our first power plant installation, which we're targeting for the middle of 2024. All right, so as I previously mentioned, we performed a full-scale commercial pilot of our mechanical energy storage where we pumped in and flowed back numerous cycles of water in our well and measured flow rate, pressure, and temperature of the water in order to calculate the output capacity and the power duration that we were producing. So during this pilot, we delivered quite a few cycles, but the highlights are we delivered 200 kilowatts for 18 hours, 450 kilowatts for 6 hours, 650 kilowatts for 2 hours, and then we were even able to deliver 1 megawatt for 30 minutes, and we were only limited by the small diameter of the surface piping that we had rented. The force of the water was actually challenging that pipe pretty seriously, so we couldn't go over one megawatt. All right, so how does it work? So what we do is we drill a well between 7,000 and 12,000 feet deep. We install a fracture where we're targeting a low permeability formation, meaning the leak off or the fluid loss is very low. And when the demand for electricity is low, we take that electricity, whether it's from a grid, a solar array, or a wind farm, and we power an electric pump water into the fracture. The fracture is wanting to balloon open, and it then stores that water under pressure. You close the wellhead valve, and you've got that storage. And then when the demand for the electricity peaks, we open the wellhead valve, and then that fracture is wanting to naturally close on the water, which literally jettisons it back to surface under a great deal of pressure and force, which we then flow the water through a Pelton turbine to generate electricity. So the depths that we're targeting, of course, can readily be drilled with existing off-the-shelf oil and gas equipment. And again, just to reiterate, we're wanting to complete the well in formations that have little or no leak off or fluid losses, which are actually prevalent at the depths that we're targeting. So there's really no exploration risk, and we are not geographically limited on where we can put this energy storage. All right, so these two data sets are from the many pump-in flowback cycles that we performed during this pilot over a 5-week period. So the visual on the left shows 17 hours of long duration production where the power output was controlled from the fracture using an oil and gas manual choke manifold. Because power output is pressure multiplied by flow rate, as the pressure starts to decrease, that's the black curve at the top, and that's when the fracture starts to close. We need to open the choke to increase the flow rate, which is the yellow curve, and therefore maintain that constant power output, which is actually the red curve. So when we did this test in particular, we had a manual choke, but we later rented an automated choke, which allowed us to draw a straight line on that power output, which is the red line. But again, with this 17 hours of pumping 7 hours of pumping in and 17 hours of storage and then producing that electricity, as you can imagine, if you pair that flow profile on the left with solar, we can actually turn solar into 24/7 base load. And then the visual on the right is load following. So it's where we release the water from the fracture in 1 hour and produce just less than 1 megawatt for about an hour, and again for load following storage. So when you use this type of storage, you can actually deliver electricity during peak demands on the utility grid. So for example, in Texas, during the summer, every day between 4 p.m. and 7 p.m., you have this peak demand. And so you can actually use this load following to meet the peak demand in that type of situation. All right, so here's a couple of videos from our pilot. The video on the left shows the sheer power of the water that the fracture is jettisoning back to the surface under pressure. And this is only part of the flow stream because we were choking the well back, and that was for our 200 kilowatt output. The video on the right are the Pelton turbines that we use to generate electricity and to power equipment on location. And then the picture in the middle shows the heat which we generated. Even though the heat from this water is not hot enough to actually generate electricity, geothermal electricity, because the well wasn't deep enough, it is hot enough to expand the fluid, which actually increases and improves the round trip efficiency of the system. And you can use this heat for different types of industrial processes. For example, direct air capture can use this type of heat for their process. Okay, I mentioned earlier, we are planning to build and commission our first energy storage power plant in mid-2024. And the critical path item is a high pressure Pelton turbine. So the highest pressure Pelton turbine that's currently in use is approximately 3,000 PSI, and there's 3 of them at a power plant. It's basically a pumped hydro power plant in Switzerland. So what we're doing is we're working with a Pelton manufacturer to re-engineer this design to 3,500 PSI. And basically the timeline to get that done is second quarter of 2024, which is driving our mid-year power plant timeline of mid-2024. Okay, so this is an artist rendering of a 10-well, 30 megawatt energy storage power plant. So we are estimating a net power output of 2 to 3 megawatts per well. And so for 10 wells, you can get 30 megawatts net power. And so before I move into my last slide, which is LCOS, I do want to give you a summary of the results that we obtained from this pilot. Okay, so again, I mentioned we produced 200 kilowatts for over 18 hours. So we demonstrated long duration storage. We also produced 1 megawatt for 30 minutes. That's when we released all the water within a very short period of time. And by doing so, we demonstrated load following storage, and that 1 megawatt was only limited by the small ID of the rental surface piping that we're using on location. We also measured the subsurface system efficiencies, which include the friction in the pipe, downhole pipe, the casing, the friction in the fracture, and the frac impedance. And we got a subsurface system efficiency of 88 to 94%. We then used that subsurface system efficiency, combined it with the well-known efficiencies for power plant equipment. So you think about injection pumps and turbines. And we use that to estimate an overall system efficiency of 70%. So again, estimated round trip efficiency for the entire system is 70%. We also measured the fluid losses from the leak off and the evaporation. In the first part of the 5 weeks, the leak off and fluid losses were about 2%. And by the end of the 5 weeks, it had decreased to 1%. And the reason is you start to build a pressure wall around the fracture, and it just lets the leak off actually slow down if you have any leak off to the formation. I also mentioned that we found that the formation heat actually improves the overall round trip efficiency of the system as it expands the fluid. And then the last result or finding was we had no induced seismicity either during the fracturing or during the subsequent pumping and flowback operations. We did not expect it, but we do have 4 monitoring stations that we are using to monitor for induced seismicity, and we saw no events whatsoever. All right, so my last slide to wrap up. So based on calculated levelized cost of storage with an output, again, of 2 to 3 megawatt net per well, and I want to say that 2 to 3 megawatt net is net of any kind of energy we expended to pump into the well, as well as any kind of friction and any other losses. So 2 to 3 megawatt net. This technology is cost competitive now with pumped hydro storage and lithium-ion batteries as far as an upfront capital cost and as well as LCOS. And then at scale, when we start to scale up the technology, we're going to be able to easily beat the cost for these other technologies. So I want to, before I hand it over to Clay, I do want to thank Project Interspace. I want to thank the Pivot team and, of course, Jamie for the opportunity to present our results. We wouldn't be here without Pivot, without Jamie. So thank you again. And over to you, Clay, for any questions.
Thank you, Cindy. Fantastic presentation. You have quite a few questions that have come in while you were speaking. So I'll get straight to those questions. The first one is, how does Sage see itself? Does Sage see itself as a storage company or as a geothermal company?
That's a great question. We see ourselves as a storage company and a geothermal company. So let me explain why. So our storage technologies, when we do the storage power plant in 2024, it's going to demonstrate about 80% of the technologies that we need for geothermal. So for geothermal, we obviously need to drill the wells deeper into the heat. We're targeting 150 degrees C or greater. And then in the power plant, we need to have a heat exchanger, and then we have to have a binary cycle turbine, which we're actually developing a supercritical CO2 turbine with the Southwest Research Institute in San Antonio. So we do see ourselves as both an energy storage and geothermal company. It's just this is the proper, in our view, the proper way to develop the technology in a quick way, basically.
Yeah, that's great. I'll combine a couple of questions here into one. What are the results versus expectations as you began this test? Did you get any surprises? Did you get what you expected? What were your thoughts as the test was completed?
Yeah, that's a great question. When Doug was doing the modeling for this test before we went into the field, he was modeling the fracture to act like a planar fracture, but we all thought it was going to act somewhere between a planar and a complex fracture. So if you can imagine a planar fracture is very simple. Complex fracture is like a bunch of roads that lead to the well bore. And so the well actually acted more like a planar frac than it did a complex frac. And why is that? It's because of the way we fracture treated the well. With our gravity fracking technology, we're using a very heavy fluid and we're using a highly viscous fluid. And that tends to, and we're pumping at very low rates and low pressure. So that tends to create that planar fracture. So even though we had modeled it, we had thought that, well, the output was going to be lower, and the output just blew us away. The output of the well, we literally had to re-pipe the surface equipment 3 times because we were getting more force and pressure than what we had anticipated.
We hear a lot about geothermal anywhere. Folks are saying, when you think about this type of solution, what do you think about for scalability and for deployment? Are there some areas that are better than others? How repeatable is Sage's approach across the US and across the world?
Yeah, thanks, Clay. Let's talk about energy storage real quick first. So energy storage, because we are not targeting heat, we think it's deployable just about everywhere. We tend to not say everywhere because you never know, but just about everywhere. There's little or no expiration risk. You're not even having to look for heat. All you're having to do is find that low permeability formation, which again is very prevalent at these depths. In fact, more prevalent than the formations that oil and gas are looking for, or even say traditional geothermal is looking for. Now, if we go to geothermal, now we need to find that heat. And for Sage, we are laser focused on unit cost of energy. So we want to be able to drill to that heat using existing oil and gas equipment right now. And so if we're targeting 150 degrees C, we're going to want to be able to drill to that heat at a depth of 21,000 feet. We recognize there's some great companies out there that are working on, space age drilling, and we're watching them closely, and we're going to hopefully follow in their footsteps. But until then, we're wanting to scale geothermal with existing equipment at these depths that we can drill to with the existing equipment. So with that being said, geothermal almost everywhere, I think, makes sense, but we do need to be able to find those temperatures at a depth of 21,000 feet or more shallow.
We have a question regarding wellbore integrity concerns. They mentioned specifically annulus, cement, casing, etc. Are there any cyclical pressure or stress changes that concern you?
Yeah, I mean, of course there is. And, the oil and gas industry, I think most people know the background of the Sage team. We all have over 150 years in the oil and gas industry. The oil and gas industry has solved a lot of those problems. And so we'll continue to ride the coattails of the oil and gas industry when we drill and design these wells. And part of that will be casing design and cement design. Yes, we will be looking after that.
Yeah. And you mentioned depths in particular. There was one question: would this be possible in shallower formations and therefore make it cheaper? Could it be applied, could the frac technology be applied in the same manner for a shallower well, for instance, in a shale formation?
Yeah, so it could be. There's a couple of considerations. If you don't get down in those deeper depths, 5,000 feet or greater, where you have a higher tendency to find those low permeability formations, then leak off can actually be an issue. Shallower, you're also going to have what they call pancake fracs or horizontal fracs. And so our thought is that the deeper we go, the benefits are the higher chance to find these low permeability formations. the energy density is actually proportional to the depth that you go. So if you can imagine, I'll go back to comparing us to pumped hydro. Pumped hydro, the tallest pumped hydro is 3,000 feet. And we can go down to, and we are targeting 7,000 to 12,000 feet. So the energy density that we're putting out is much greater than pumped hydro. So there is a crossover. In fact, we've just been having that conversation within our company the last 2 weeks of, where is the crossover on what is the most economic? So it goes back to unit cost, because we can go deeper and we can get more energy, but it's going to cost us more. But so does that mean we go, shallower and less energy, but it is cheaper? But yeah, we just don't want to go as shallow as anything shallower than say 5, 6, 7,000 feet.
And would the technology be restricted to low permeability depleted gas reservoirs?
It would be what we're looking for, because we're wanting that fracture, which is an artificial reservoir that we've created, to be watertight. We're wanting that formation permeability to be low. It does not have to be depleted, but we want the permeability to be low, and it doesn't have to be a gas zone necessarily. But most of the time, when you get deeper than say 10,000 feet, you're naturally going to be in a gas. But no, it doesn't have to be depleted, or it does not have to be a gas zone. But we are looking for lower permeability. Our rule of thumb is 10 millidarcy. But there's some circumstances that slightly higher permeability can work. And we've got ideas on how to make that work.
Another question, is this technology better in, say, existing fractures and wells, or are you thinking more greenfield development?
Yeah, we're thinking more greenfield development, but so when we create these fractures, again, we're using our gravity frac, which is a heavy fluid, pumped at a very low rate. We don't have any proppant in the fracture. Now, with that being said, we would love to re-enter a well and see what an existing fracture would act like with our technology. We think it is going to act very similar. What we don't know is what that proppant's going to do, whether that's going to work with us or against us. But mainly we'll be drilling new wells, so greenfield.
Another question here. Many geothermal developments are losing economic value because of the time it takes to reach first power. Can Sage help de-risk larger geothermal projects and support faster cash generation in these projects?
Well, yeah, I mean, we think we can. We think we can not only de-risk them, but we think we can deliver a product in the end that is cheaper, taking into account the upfront capital cost, because we're using this single well EGS system. We're eliminating some of the challenges involved with multi-well systems, like having to connect fractures between wells and then having short circuiting of that water as you're pumping it between wells, and even huge friction losses as you're pumping that water between wells. So again, I think we can not only de-risk it, but I think we can make a lot of projects more economic, because we're using we're not only using the heat of the water, we're using the pressure of the water as well. So that increases our output tremendously compared to other technologies.
Okay. I think we have time for maybe one more question, and I'll combine a couple of questions again for you here. Any updates that Sage can provide on your Ellington Air Force Base project, and maybe along with that, where do you envision Sage in, let's say, 2 years or 5 years from now?
Yeah, no, Ellington is ongoing. We finished the feasibility study in late 2022. We've been working with the U.S. military on how to fund that it's a 3 megawatt microgrid, 3 megawatt net microgrid system. They were trying to decide if they were going to fund it or if they wanted to write a PPA. So that's ongoing. The next step would be how do we come to an agreement with the Air Force. And yeah, where are we going to be in 2 years? Where are we going to be in 5 years? So we are going to, in 2 years, we will have proven our our energy storage in a power plant. We will have built a power plant, and in 2 years, we will have leveraged the learnings from building that energy storage power plant to build a geothermal power plant. And Clay, the sky's the limit. We'll be scaling up. We've already got a lot of partners and other investors that are interested in what we're doing, and they're ready to scale as soon as we start delivering electricity in our first of a kind.
That's fantastic. Well, it's been great talking with you, learning more about Sage and your test in Starr County, and look forward to reading more and hearing about what's in store for Sage in the days and months and years to come.
Hey, thanks, Clay. Appreciate it.